Hello and welcome to this Friday's Facebook Live. I am back doing Facebook Lives after having taken a bit of a break in March when I was putting up some blogs that have been done by other professionals, which I always love talking to other professionals because they often have a different way of looking at things, or they bring other things that are not something that's naturally in my skill set. And it just really helps me to kind of think about other things and also to know about other resources that may be able to help separating couples. But in April, I am back doing another series of blogs, and this time I am focusing on well-being in a separation. And I think that's something that people might find a little strange, maybe, because if ever there was a time where your well-being might have taken a bit of a tumble, or you really might be feeling not about the self-care, then it's when you're going through something as difficult as a separation. But I would turn that on its head and say that because you're going through a difficult time, and because you may be under stress and dealing with difficult emotional issues, that more than anything is a time when you need to think about your well-being and to be taking care of yourself, whatever that needs to look like for you. And in this series of blogs, I'm going to be focusing on different aspects of well-being to kind of look at it from different angles, and hopefully to try and help anyone who's going through a separation to think about what they need to be doing with regard to their well-being. So as always, stay tuned to the blog because you'll then see the blogs coming up. And if you'd like to get our blogs and the resources that I share directly into your inbox, then if you sign up for our free mailing list, you get them delivered twice a month into your inbox with any other information or resources that I think might be useful for people. So you can sign up by going to bit.ly/LKW FamMed list. And if you're a professional that works with individuals or couples going through a separation, then I have a separate mailing list for you. And that includes all of the same resources that you can share with your clients, but it also includes details of networking and training workshop events that I'm either running or involved in that may be of interest for you. So if you're a professional, sign up to our mailing list at bit.ly/LKW FamMed sign up. So let's get into talking about this week's blog. And this week's blog in the Wellbeing series was focusing on knowing your stress points. And I think this is really, really important to try and make your separation as constructive and amicable as it possibly can be. And I say that for a number of reasons, which I'm going to sort of go into, which I talked about in the blog, but hopefully expand a little bit on today. When you separate from someone, it is completely normal to have lots of fears going on, as well as lots of emotions and generally feeling that you've run into a really difficult life event. There can be so many different fears that come up as part of a separation. The common ones that I see are fear of having to move out of your home, to sell your home and buy another home, and knowing that that home may not be as nice as the home that you're in at the moment. It's going to be smaller, it might not be in the same area, you might not have the same facilities within your home, and that can be a very real fear. Because often separation does mean that there are going to have to be financial compromises, and moving to a smaller property, it can be one of those. So that can be a fear that comes up that is grounded in reality, but which can often have very profound effects on how people deal with things. Because if you've got something that is a real fear, then it tends to become a stress point, which means that when you try and talk about things constructively, that's often when things can end up in really heated arguments, because one person just doesn't want to go down the road of talking about selling the home because it's something they're really fearful about. Another fear that I often see is where one person has not been working because they've been at home looking after children, and It looks like when they separate, they may have to look at returning to work, or possibly sometimes it can also be working more hours. And that can bring up all kinds of fears, because there can be fears around the person returning to work and them feeling lacking in confidence about that, or worrying about, I've been out of the workplace for a long period of time. How on earth am I going to deal with that? How am I going to be able to fit back into a workplace situation? And I know that was something that that was touched upon in the blog that Claire Gardner from CG Executive did for me back in a couple of weeks ago. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, then have a look on the blog or have a look at Claire's work for CG Executive, and the link is in the blog. So again, that can be fears about the future and about what that might look like for you, and returning to work when you have been out of the workplace for some time. There can also be fears with regard to going back to work or working more hours for your children. If you had always envisaged that together as a married couple, your children would be looked after by a parent at home, and that parent would be at the school gate, then it can be very difficult to get your head around the fact that your children may not have that going forwards. They may have to go into some kind of after school club at the school, or be with a childminder or something like that. And often we have a narrative that we create for ourselves, and I've talked about this in a previous blog. We have a narrative that is about what your life will be like and what your children's life will be like. And sometimes that can come from our parents. If one of our parents was at home when we were young, then that's maybe something we want to create for our children. Or it can be the kind of reverse, that if you felt that your parents weren't there for you when you were younger because they were at work, at some point you may have decided, actually, I'm always going to be there for my children. I will be at the school gate. They won't go into childcare because I didn't enjoy that as a child. And so a narrative is created along those lines, so that when you come to dealing with issues from a separation, there can be certain issues that are really the ones that, I think I said in the blog, make you behave like a wounded tiger, because they are your points that really connect to your most deep-rooted fears about your future. And it's really, really common to be fearful about the future when you're going through a separation. And if you were the one that didn't make the decision to separate, then that can exacerbate some of your fears, because you haven't been contemplating these for very long, and you've had something thrust upon you that you weren't expecting. Even where you're the person that's made the decision to separate, you can know it's the right thing and that things will be better going forward in terms of the relationship, but you may still be very fearful about what the future holds for you in terms of where you're going to live, how you're going to make ends meet. And when I see couples in mediation, something that is often said to me is that, well, we've tried to talk about things between ourselves, but it always ends up in an argument. And often that can be because you're trying to talk about issues that are pushing people's stress points. So if you're trying to explore an option that will involve moving out of the family home, selling the family home so no one lives there, that can be something that people hold very deep-seated fears about, and that makes them react, because we all have things that push our buttons, and they quite often relate to fears that have either developed as we've got older, or sometimes relate to fears from childhood. So that's often why things can escalate into an argument when you try to talk about things. And I think sometimes that's a thing that can be frustrating for people, because they want to sort things out amicably, and they both want to do that, but they don't necessarily understand why it is that they can't. Sometimes it can be because both people are having their buttons pushed, and that's making them react. Sometimes it can be one person feeling frustrated that they're trying to be businesslike and the other person is behaving more emotionally. And again, I come back to the fact that often we do behave emotionally when people are talking about things that are treading on the deepest fears that we have. So what can you do about it? if you know that's you. How can you move forward? The first thing is being honest with yourself about this fear. And that's not an easy thing to do. Facing up to our fears is often something that takes an enormous amount of courage. Our brains are wired very intricately, and often they do their best to protect us from going near our fears, because why would you want to do that? Our subconscious is designed to keep us safe. So it will often try and circumvent things in order for us to avoid things that are difficult. But it's only by looking at what this fear is doing inside you that you can effectively face it and deal with it. If you are really worried about moving to another property, there's things you can do to deal with that. The first question is, do you have to move to another property? What does life look like if you stay in that property? Is it something that is financially affordable? Is it something that you can do for a period of time to just enable you to kind of work yourself up to having to make that change? And again, this is where I come back to family mediation, because in family mediation, we explore different options and see what the realities of that option will look like, so that people can judge whether it's the right one for them, whether it's realistic or not, what compromises may have to be made to enable that option to work. And if it's something that people are fearful about, then we can talk about that in mediation. And I really strongly believe that for a separating couple to find the way forward together, they need to understand each other's worries, priorities, objectives, concerns. And you might not agree with them. You may think they are ridiculous, but unless you understand what is haunting the other person, driving the other person, what they're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about, you're not going to be able to find a solution that will work for both of you. So it's really important to name these fears and to face them, because if you face them, you can work out what you need to enable you to do that. If, for example, you can see, having worked through the figures, that you're going to need to do some work or do some more work, what do you need to enable you to feel better about having to do that? Is it that you need to do some training so that you feel that your skills have been brushed up on? Is it maybe that you need to meet some other work colleagues who you used to work with, who can kind of talk you through things and just make you feel a bit more confident? And I know that's something, again, that Claire talked about in her blog. Is it that you feel you need something to make you feel more confident? If you feel your confidence has taken quite a hit with the divorce or the separation, how can you help yourself to feel more confident? And one of the things that I am really passionate about, which I'm sure you know if you've been watching my Facebook Lives, is that often part of helping a separating couple to move forward is identifying what support they need to enable them to get past whatever obstacle they're currently dealing with. And if there's a real fear about returning to work, then let's talk about what support, what help would enable someone to feel better about that. Because if they can deal with that fear so that it's not such a big fear, then that's going to mean it's much easier for you both to come together and to talk about an option without the other person sort of, reacting in the way that we all as humans do when someone has pushed our buttons. So I do think that naming your fears and understanding your fears is crucial in enabling people to move forward. And often there can be, the phrase I'm going to use is irrational fears, sometimes because they're fears of things that are not necessarily going to happen, not in the same way that life changes like moving home or going back to work might happen. But this doesn't mean that these fears are any more real to the person that's experiencing them. And sometimes just being able to say them out loud can be helpful, and being able to have a conversation about that. People have fears about lots and lots of different things in a separation, and I have been privileged to have people open up and share with me the fears that they hold. And some of them are things that, once you're on the other side and you look back, you think, I don't know why I worried about that. But at the time, they seem very, very real. And so much changes with a separation, not just between the couple involved, but also with regard to their friends and family and extended family. So it's understandable that at this time, people can worry about all manner of things, from their relationships with other people to how they're going to move forward together, to what life will be like for their children, both now and in the future. It's a time of real worry and concern. And when we have worries and concerns that are particularly affecting us particularly strongly, that can be when we have our buttons pushed a bit more, and that can just make conversation more difficult. So again, it comes down to naming those fears, but also if your ex-partner says to you, well, I'm worried about this, bear in mind how they're feeling. You may think it's the most ridiculous thing to be worried about, but if it's a valid concern and a valid fear for that person, then reacting in a more empathetic way and just acknowledging the fear. You don't have to say, oh yeah, I feel that way too, if you don't feel that way, but just acknowledging the fear. I can see this is a big issue for you. I can see that you're really worried about this. And talking about it is much more likely to mean that you can find a way forward together. And if you think that's difficult to do between yourselves, then coming into family mediation and talking with the benefit of a trained mediator who can structure your discussions and try and keep you on point, and just create a space where it's okay and it feels all right to share those kind of things. It may also be helpful to think about some form of therapy if these fears are affecting you both, enabling you both to deal with those fears, or having the person that's experiencing the fears deal with that on their own and have the time and space to do that. Then again, that can be particularly helpful. So that's all today for this Facebook Live. Next week on Monday, the next blog will be going live talking about more to do with well-being in a separation. And stay tuned, because I will be back for next Friday for another Facebook Live talking about that blog. In the meantime, if you like our Facebook page, please feel free to share any of the resources from it. And as I said earlier in the Facebook Live, you can also sign up to our free mailing list. And I will put the link to the blog that I was talking about with Claire Gardner from CG Executive in the comments on this. So take care and have a great weekend. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.